Hi, Dr. H here with Family Centered Parenting. Good to see you again. Today's topic is going to be how to enjoy raising teenagers. I know many parents would respond that that's almost impossible to enjoy the teenage years, but frankly, it is possible. And I'm going to talk about some steps we could all take as parents raising our teens to make the experience enjoyable. So here's some tips. First one, prepare, be proactive. Prepare for the teen years in your parenting. Start early. If you have a foundation and you've created a structure for setting rules, for problem solving, etc., as they emerge into the teenage years, you could rely on that structure to continue their parenting journey in more depth as your children grow older. So please start early. I know a lot of parents I've heard who have a relatively authoritarian style, who are strict and say, well, when I talk, my kids do it. Fine. That might work for younger kids, but once they start getting older and creating the need to be their own person and push away from their parents, that kind of parenting style falls flat. Even those parents who tend to use some corporal punishment, you reach a point where your teen is your size or bigger, it just becomes very inappropriate. You're not going to give a little spank anymore. And to do anything that requires inflicting something they'll remember borders on corporal punishment, physical abuse, etc. You don't want to go there, and it doesn't work. So that's why I'm a great advocate that, parenting the teen years becomes more enjoyable and easier the earlier we start to put a structure in that will relieve the stress and hassle of raising teens. So start early. The next thing is, let's face it, the best structure for raising teenagers, for raising any kids, and I go to it all the time. I mention it very much in my book, and I have a copy right here. Family Centered Parenting, your guide to growing great families. I have a whole chapter on family meetings, how to set them up, how to start out, how to set ground rules, all the steps needed. But it's so important to have the family meeting as a ritual in your family. And I often say, you define your family, I'm not defining it for you. Whatever you consider your family is who should be in the family meeting. But as long as there's a family meeting, that's the great structure. And if you haven't started family meetings earlier, it's never too late. It takes a little longer to get the kids used to the routine, but on the other hand, when they're older, they'll respond more quickly to the routine. So even if you haven't done family meetings, start during the teen years. It is the best vehicle for the most important part of your journey with your teens is the communication journey. So remember to understand that most struggles with teens involves power. And I mean power not overpowering. I mean power in the sense that you control over your environment. As our kids get older and stretch boundaries and limits, what they're looking for is control in their life. They want that sense of power as they separate, as they begin to create what we call in psychology adolescent ideation, adult ideation, the beginning of a teen getting a sense of who they are separate from just being part of the family, who they are as an individual, not just a child of their parents. So understand that most of the struggles we have with teens involves something about control, decision-making, freedom, control. So the question is, how do we empower teens without giving up parental authority? And that's a tough one, not easy, and it takes some work. So, what are the steps to do it? Most importantly is effective communication. Being an active listener. And we talk about one of the principles of active listening is seek to understand before being understood, which basically says keep your mouth shut while someone else is talking. When they're all done, simply say, "This is what I heard. Did I get it right?" And they will tell you yes or no and modify. So what we've established is at least I've heard clearly what my teen is saying. And the fact that they feel heard gives them a sense of power, just being listened to. Because you often hear from teens, "Oh, you don't understand me, you never listen to me." It becomes a big, big issue for teens as they begin to push away from their parents. So it's important that we at least model and show that they're good listeners. And once our children and our teens feel that they're being heard and listened to, that restores that power and makes it less necessary for them to seek power by acting out, by being overly impulsive, by taking too many risks, which are all part, of course, of adolescent development. So the first thing is being a good listener. The second thing is validating. And I've talked about this before. Validating simply means that what the teen is experiencing is real for them and you acknowledge them. So if your daughter comes to you and says, "I'm so upset, my best friend is having a sleepover and she didn't invite me. She invited 2 other girls." And your teen is almost in tears. Now, your first instinct as a parent might be, "Oh, it's not so bad. There'll be other sleepovers." As a parent, we want to ease our child's discomfort, and that's a mistake. The first thing to say is, "Wow, you must be really upset because your friend did not invite you to sleep over. What do you think we can do about it?" So by validating, one, it shows you're heard. It shows that for them, they now know that their feelings are real for them. Doesn't mean you agree with their feelings. That's the key. Validation does not mean agreement. It just means you know for that person what they're expressing is real for them. And that's the heart of validation. And being heard and being validated, again, is inherently empowering to a human being. Not just to a teen, to any of us. When we're not heard, when we're not listened to, is when we get angry and the negative emotions flow. At least when we're heard and understood, then we are much more capable of compromise and problem solving. The next thing is negotiation. Now, I know sometimes negotiation can be a dirty word. People don't like to hear it. Parents always associate negotiation with giving up, not holding your ground as a parent. And that's not really true. It's when we negotiate and what we negotiate that determines whether it's a worthwhile experience. So negotiating rules, expectations, those are the kinds of things that we can do in a family meeting. And I mean by negotiate is not give in to everything the kids want, but at least listen to what they are suggesting. Be honest about what you as a parent are expressing and need. And when the two come together, you as a parent might be willing to compromise a little bit on a rule. And your child, If they hear your point of view and where you can't compromise, they too will work on compromise, on coming up with a rule or expectation that they feel makes sense for them. When they feel it makes sense for them, that establishes ownership. And there have been many studies in different environments, in schools, in home, when people feel a sense of ownership in a rule or an expectation, they're much more likely to follow it. They need less reminders, fear of punishment, guidance, etc., when they own the rule. I'm going to give you an example, a personal example. When my two older children were in elementary school, I think they were fourth and fifth grade, and we lived in a town with a neighborhood school where they walked. And both my wife at the time and I, we both worked full time. So our children after school would go to the after school center till either my wife or I would be done with work and pick them up. And it came to the point where my two kids, my fifth and fourth grader, really did not like the after school center. They found it noisy, they couldn't do their homework. It was not an environment they wanted to be in. So they wanted to be latchkey kids. They wanted to walk home from school to an empty house and take care of themselves. Well, at first, you can imagine as a parent, my wife and I said, that's nuts, that's crazy. But we backed off and we said to the kids, all right, you come up with some rules and expectations about being a latchkey kid, and let's see what you come up with. Sure enough, a couple of days later, my daughter, who kind of was the older one, kind of a spokesperson for her brother, she came forth and said, this is what we propose. We'll come home from school, we'll lock the door, we'll do our homework, we will call either you or mom at work to let you know we're at home, we won't answer any phone calls. Again, we'll do our homework, not turn on the TV, and our snack, we're going to each have a half a cup of Cheez-Its as our snack, and not go outside, not answer the doorbell, etc. And that's what we propose as the rules. And their mother and I, we went over it, made a few modifications, and said, let's try it. And you know what? It worked perfectly. In fact, my children, who are now adults and parents of their own, one day we were talking about it, and they said, Dad, do you know when we were latchkey kids, we never took more than a half a cup of Cheez-Its for our snack. So it was just a demonstration of their feeling ownership in the rule because they had a lot of say in establishing the rule. There was no excuse for breaking the rule. They owned it. It was their rule. And you can hold people accountable when they own and have input in the rule. They can't say, oh, you never asked me, you never invited my opinion, you never listened to me. All those are out the door. It was all done in the family meeting, establishing the rule. So, negotiation, creating that ownership in a rule or expectation is crucial. When we don't negotiate is when a rule is in place and we're in a situation and then our child wants to break the rule. That's not the time to negotiate. So most parents, when I say negotiate, think of that situation. And there I'm in agreement. That's when you don't negotiate. You have a rule, it's already established. The children have had some input in establishing. You don't negotiate when you're in the situation. You might say to the child, well, if you don't like the rule and you want a modification, you're going to follow it by now. In the next family meeting, we can talk about it. But we do not negotiate the rule at the time that you are trying to break it. So that's the difference. Negotiation is a wonderful thing, but it has to happen at the right time. Another thing is remind your teen that you were once a teen. Let's face it, you didn't get to be an adult and a parent unless you too were a teen. So you don't throw it in your kid's face, But when they say you don't understand, you can come back and say, I might not understand your current situation, but believe me, I understand what it's like to be a teen. And that's a good time. Our teens like to hear some of our own stories, what we went through as teenagers, how we cope with some of the stresses are very similar. Yeah, social media, the world is different, 24-hour news cycle. I have no disagreement that the world has changed. But when it comes to the fundamentals of childhood development, of being a teenager, what it means, how you handle it, those things haven't changed. The anxiety, feeling that I'm fitting in, friendships, peer groups, getting along, who am I? All of those things, body dysmorphia, those are not new. Those are universal. And if we remind or just mention to our kids, when I grew up and I was in high school, I felt at times it was very difficult to make friends, or I was in transition of what I really liked. Share your story. If you don't overdo it, kids enjoy hearing our stories, especially when we tell it with honesty, when we talk about our mistakes, how we resolved it. It makes us real. And another thing that happens at this age is children tend to see us with some of our flaws. When we're younger, we're these magical adult parents who know all, take care of us, protect us, and they put us on a pedestal. As we get into the teen years and they mature, they see the cracks in the pedestal. We're not perfect. We're people. We make mistakes. We're adults. And they begin to see it. So be honest about who we were, what it was like to be a teen, and that goes a long way. And the last thing to mention is pull back a little bit. Don't lose your sense of humor. When you hear about some of the excesses and concerns about your teens, laugh to yourself, not to them necessarily, because we don't want to trivialize their feelings. But it's certainly okay. Laugh to yourself. Find it with some sense of amusement. Remember your own teenage years. Don't get overly critical and take it too seriously. Keep your sense of humor. So my point in summary is, you can enjoy raising teenagers. And remember, you're reaching the end of day-to-day parenting. Many children, when they reach senior year in high school, 18, they might go off to college, try to live on their own in some capacity, which I know has become more and more difficult these days. But that separation and that day-to-day parenting changes. So enjoy these years because they're limited, and you want to preserve your relationship with your children as they mature and grow. And use the teenage years. If you manage them well, you'll be setting the foundation for as they move on and grow into adulthood. You've had a good basis for an excellent relationship. So for now, Dr. A signing off. Go to FamilyCenteredParenting.com for more information, and I hope to see you again. Take care. Bye.